All right, so thank you so much for joining the Society for the Study of Emerging Adulthood's February webinar. We have with us today Kelley Wick, who's a fifth-year doctoral candidate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She received her Master's of Arts in Educational Psychology from UNL in 2021 and is expected to graduate in 2024 with her PhD in Developmental and Learning Sciences with a minor in Quantitative, Qualitative, and Psychometric Methods and a certificate in mixed methods research. So, broadly, her research interests are centered around belonging and well being among students and faculty in higher education, especially in underrepresented and historically marginalized populations. Her current research projects include quantitatively examining the impact of faculty support as a protective factor for students in these populations, as well as utilizing mixed methodology to develop a novel measure of well being specifically for emerging adults. I also want to mention that Kelley will be finishing up her dissertation soon. And so if you're looking for someone with Kelley's skill set, I'm going to drop her website into the chat, and you can feel free to reach out to her with any job ads or any other information that you'd like to speak with her about. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kelley, who is going to present February's webinar.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate seeing all of you interested in inclusive teaching practices and how we can make a more inclusive world in our academy. So I'm going to share my screen. One of the things I do want to make sure is that everyone understands that I am fully open science. So any materials you see here are available and I can send them to you. I can reach out with Melissa and get all of the materials to you, whoever is looking for any of them. So I'm happy to give all of the materials that I've created and whatever I've used. I see really quickly. So here's the agenda of things I really wanted to go through today. I'm just going to do a really quick introduction. I'm actually probably going to skip through that because Melissa did such a great job of introducing me. And then I want to go into traditional DEI framework and specifically some of the problems that we're coming up against with this framework. I'm going to introduce a slightly new approach that looks at DEI in a different way. And then we're really going to get into the examples. I have a ton of examples for you. I have a lot of different methods and strategies I've used that have been successful. I've cultivated all of these through the last couple of years of my own research, reading and working with different people to really figure out, okay, what's the problem with diversity and why are we so focused on just that piece? And that's just a little teaser into what we'll actually talk about. And then I really want to hear your thoughts. We can learn so much from each other, and I know that you all are doing amazing things out there that I'm not aware of, and I think that we can share those. Okay, so quick introduction. Here's my elevator pitch CV. However, like I said, Melissa did a great job. My name is Kelley. You can call me that. I'm not a doctor yet, even though the Zoom said I was. I will be hopefully in May. This is the goal. So first, I want you to think about what inclusivity means. What is it to be inclusive, and how is that reflected in your current practices or your current departments or institutions? So when I think about DEI, I really think about what those different pieces mean. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really something that has been on the forefront of a lot of what's going on with universities around the world. DEI has become a really prevalent push. And so this is something that I want to explore a little bit more about, just something that I've been doing a lot of literature review and reading on, as well as this is what's folded into my dissertation and my future research. So one of the things that I would like to do, I'm going to put this link in the chat. One of the things I do with my students a lot is to have interactive ways of communicating and spurring discussion. And so what this is a way for you to share your thoughts anonymously. So all you have to do is click on this little plus sign at the bottom, and you can add whatever it is that you'd like to add. So I'm going to pull that up. And so, like I said, you can click on this and write your thoughts. So what does DEI mean to you? And what are some of the DEI initiatives that you're using at your own institution right now? And feel free to speak. I would love to have conversations. The way that I do things is really open, and I like to have conversations with people rather than have me sit here and lecture. Fair assessment practices for all students. Yeah. What else do you think? This can be what you personally do, what your school is putting forward as the most important things for you to work on, or maybe directives directly from your institution or department. Everyone is included in our work, and we actively think about the voices we might not be hearing and how to include them. Connection, sense of being fed when invited to the banquet. I think that's a beautiful way of putting that. Conscious focus on inclusion, essentially making sure that everyone in the room feels welcomed and included and sees themselves reflected in the conversation. Students are welcome, supported, and feel a sense of belonging. Yeah, statistics, man versus woman. I will talk a little bit about that and how I'm using that in my research, because that was definitely something that I noticed as well. Specifically in my research, I'm interested in looking at well-being and belonging in college students, and especially for those that are not traditionally invited to speak or invited to use their voices, historically marginalized individuals. So being able to use my demographics as a way to really diversify what I ask and how I get people kind of on board with what I'm trying to research is asking lots of questions. Good. So this is a really strong start. You can continue to add to this. Let's see. I like that among the other important conversations, like how race isn't well represented historically in my field. That is absolutely true. As someone who's coming from psychology, I feel the same. Never feeling like an imposter. Oh, that's a hard ask in education. I don't know about you, but I still feel like an imposter most of the time. Okay, you can continue to add to this. This will be a tool that we can use to kind of go back to. So with this, what do you notice about the types of answers, not necessarily that you all were putting on this, but what most people seem to be concentrating on when we're talking about DEI and what it means? What are they usually telling us to do? Any thoughts? Okay, well, I'll move on. It's okay. Traditional DEI frameworks. So this is where I was getting at with that. A lot of the traditional views for DEI focus on diversity. And a lot of that is looking at, okay, how can we make our course materials, our hiring practices more diverse so that we can have more representation. However, that's not necessarily what DEI should be looking at necessarily, right? So if we're just looking at diversity as and representation as the main focus, we're losing a little bit of what the message is, and we're losing a little bit of what DEI really stands for at its core. So DEI has kind of become this umbrella term for anything that's related to diversity initiatives, I've noticed, and it seems to have gotten a bit overused. That doesn't mean that DEI doesn't have a place. What I'm going to mention is that I just think of DEI in a slightly different way, and hopefully it will resonate with you. So when I usually ask people these questions and I ask them what DEI means, like I said, it looks a lot like, how can we add diversity and representation? So I really take issue with the word add. And the reason for that is that because adding diversity, one, tells me that it's being done after the fact. It's being done post hoc. And it also indicates a very narrow focus where really the only metric that we can use is looking at more representation and better diversity in our practices. However, that doesn't really solve the main problem. So it highlights that there is a problem with a lack of diversity in a lot of schools, a lot of faculty members, staff. Our faculty aren't necessarily reflecting what our students actually look like or the populations that they serve. And so we say, okay, there's this lack of diversity. It's a problem, but it doesn't give us any indication of how to actually find solutions for it. So for me, I'm going to talk a lot about my journey and how I've kind of navigated this. For me, I started to self-reflect. With this, I went to all sorts of different websites. Harvard has a great program that they do that's called Project Implicit. It's a really nice way for you to be able to understand your own conscious and unconscious biases. And so that's one of the things I started with. I also do a values exercise with my students. I did it myself and I liked it so much that I ended up putting it into my normal repertoire for my classes. And so I help my students explore their identities, especially along the lines of when I'm teaching ethics and specifically ethics and research, as well as the idea of this unbiased researcher, which doesn't really exist. That's a myth that we kind of have to dispel a little bit here. And so when we talk about, we all have biases and we all have either conscious ones that we're aware of or something that's under the surface. It's not necessarily something that we can necessarily do anything about if we don't know about them. So that's why we do Project Implicit. So most people know about the iceberg analogy. Almost every one of us has used it at one point or another. And for this, I don't really like that one as much. I wanted to come up with something different. So what I use is these guys right here. So these are the stone heads that are found on Easter Island. And so they were discovered in 1722. There's 900 of them, roughly. And they were carved somewhere between 1100 and 1500. But it really remained a mystery as to why they were there, how they got to their final resting points, because the quarries that the volcanic rock that they used to carve were far away from the coast. And all of these ended up near the coast. And that's where their final resting places are. Plus, they're upright. And they didn't have anything modern to be able to put them in that position. And so there was a lot of mystery shrouded around this. So in the early 1900s, archaeologists went to Easter Island and they discovered that their heads were actually attached to torsos. But this knowledge was not made public. It was something that a lot of people talked about, but within the scientific community, but no one really put it out there for the rest of the public to understand. And it really wasn't until 2012, that's right, an excavation done by Yale they sent a group of scientists out there and they went and found and unburied some of these torsos, and some of them were completely removed. About 4 of them, I believe, are now in history museums around the world. And so what these were is that no one really understood that there were torsos until 2012. And then it became public knowledge. It was published. The age of the internet allowed it to be a little bit more open rather than really close-knit scientific community. So the analogy that I'm trying to make is that, like these stone heads, diversity is really what we can see on the surface. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the underlying problems that are causing the lack of diversity. So like the heads, we only see what we can see. And so if we don't have more information, we assume what you can visually see is all that there is. But I see diversity as something much deeper than that. So here's my new approach, and I hope that you follow along with me with this. So our role as educators, how I see it, is that it's really crucial that we take an active role in developing pedagogy that has diversity, equity, and inclusion completely woven in from the very start. So rather than doing something after the fact, like I mentioned, I had a problem with the word add. When we look at something like that, where we're saying we're going to add diversity to it, it doesn't necessarily resonate with solving the real problems as to why we're missing diversity, why we don't have accurate representation among our faculty members, our staff, our materials, all of these. So diversity really isn't something that should be included post hoc. But really, as you're developing materials, you should be using that while you are creating everything. However, that's not necessarily where all of us are. A lot of us have already had materials, so adding diversity to them is not a bad thing. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that hopefully one day we can come where this is actually the norm, where we're doing this from the very start. So here's an illustrative example of DEI as I see it and how I'm looking at it at a slightly different approach. So look at this house. It's beautiful. It is representing higher education. So diversity in this new way of looking at it is the equivalent of what you can temporarily add to the exterior of the home. So this is, think about anything that you might add to increase curb appeal. So you're looking at adding flowers, landscaping, trees, bushes, beautiful pathways, lighting, things that make your house look beautiful if you were trying to sell it. So diversity is similar to this, where it shows on the surface, hey, look, we've got diverse representation, but it's not necessarily long lasting, and it can be easily replaced. So it's not very burdensome for the institution to actually act on this, but it also doesn't have that lasting effect like real change. So inclusion, for me, looks at going beyond these temporary changes. So you're looking about making changes that actually improve the value. So you're adding value to your institution by including the voices of those that have not necessarily always been included. So with the house analogy, we're looking at working with experts. So we hire people to help us figure out what the problems are or how we find the solutions for these problems that we're coming up with. And so this could be like adding a pool or adding a new addition of a room, or maybe a privacy fence that will surround the whole property to make sure that your pets stay safe. So these are adding value. So these are deeper than surface level. They're asking questions from experts and they're actually listening to find where they can have improvements. These are permanent or semi-permanent changes. They're longer lasting than a new paint color on the front door or some flowers that you've planted to up your curb appeal on the house. So this is about making lasting change, specifically by bringing in the experts to help you figure out what those changes are necessary and how to do them. So now equity, on the other hand, is really about addressing those root problems. So what I see equity as, okay, it might not be immediately noticeable, but there's something that are massive problems within the structure of the home. So fixing major issues that maybe you don't even see anything on the outside, like a cracked foundation or bad wiring, outdated pipes that need to get replaced to your septic system, things like that, where fundamentally they're structurally very important to the house. However, they may not actually be seen with the naked eye. So you might not see these improvements, but the improvements make a huge difference in how the home is structured and how it functions. So these are necessary for the house, absolutely necessary. A lot of these are difficult problems. They're costly and they require a lot of hard work, but these will actually help you solve the major issues so that you can have a house that is habitable for everyone. So for this, the way that I see DEI is that equity really needs to be the goal rather than somewhere kind of thrown in the middle like we have been doing with DEI. With DEI, everything's kind of thrown in at the same time. Diversity, equity, inclusion are all kind of together. But if we parse them out a little bit, that helps us to understand that equity is really what we should be striving for. So back to the house analogy, no matter how much money you spend on room additions and pools, if you have a cracked foundation, you're not passing an inspection. And that's kind of where I want to get to when I look at this slightly different viewpoint of DEI. So this is improving equity in higher education, needing to be the main focus. So equity is what I see as the foundation for all of this. And I hope that if you have questions, you can throw them out there. If you have comments, I would love to hear them. So when we go back to looking at DEI, like I said, we kind of throw diversity, equity, inclusion all together, same level, and kind of just say, well, if we increase representation, a lot of the times that'll solve our problems. But that's not necessarily true, especially if you're looking at it from that house perspective with that cracked foundation. If you're looking at increasing diversity and representations as the primary goal, it's not offering a solution of how to actually get there. So it's great in shifting appearances. If we have a beautifully diverse faculty and staff that represent the students and the community in which this institution is serving, it looks good on the outside. However, did it actually fundamentally change anything about how equitable or inclusive the institution is? Short answer is no. So my proposal for a new approach is looking at equity as the focus and looking at, okay, we have equity as the goal, amplifying the voices of those who are not necessarily brought to the table historically, and following through with lasting permanent change. And so this is how I see DEI. Equity plus inclusion equals diversity. So if you solve the root problems, diversity is the natural outcome when we have equity as the priority. So if we're really trying to make a more equitable academy, we do that by bringing in those voices, so that inclusivity, and the natural outcome is that we have a more diverse and representative group of people that are in charge of our institutions. So with this, it really goes down to effort and commitment. Adding diversity to course materials is an important step. So I'm not going to rag on that at all. It's just that it's not the only step. It's a great start. And it's something I'm going to go into a lot of specifics about what I've done to change, what I've had peers tell me they've done in order to have more equity in their classrooms. The truth is that our students are smart, and they can tell whether or not we're just adding diversity because we're told to by our departments, and whether or not we really truly believe in being committed to equity and really fixing the major problems that are in this institution because there are problems. So it's being honest with ourselves and our schools and being able to see what the improvements are necessary. So if you're committed and you put in the effort, your students absolutely will notice. And I can't tell you how big of a difference it makes when you're committed versus I've certainly had professors that have added diversity into their classes just for the sake of adding diversity, but it doesn't solve the problems and it doesn't feel real and it doesn't feel genuine. So now this is where I want to get into real examples. I have a lot of my own personal examples that I've tried over the last couple of years and things that I have been trialing. The great thing about being a graduate student still at this stage is that I have been teaching the entire time I've been in grad school. And so I have about 5 years of education experience now. And each semester I've made small changes. And so if nothing else, I want you to know that this is a process. It takes time. And it took me a lot of energy and time and reading to really understand what it is that I wanted out of this and what my main goals were. One of the things that I'll say is I do a lot of statistics, and I do a lot of upper level statistics with structural equation modeling in my research. And sometimes you get lost in the weeds. So you get lost in the weeds of like trying to figure out what these different pieces are, and then you forget what your actual goal is. And so one of the things that I still do to this day is something that my advisor asked me to do the very first time when I was starting with my thesis work. She said, write down the main goal, your main hypothesis on a sticky note and stick it on the wall above your computer. And I do that now. It's amazing because you get stuck in the weeds and then you can just look up and see that was the goal. So if you put equity on a sticky note, say, okay, what am I doing? Is what I'm doing actually helping to make it more equitable, or am I just adding diversity for diversity's sake? As I already said, I kind of prefaced this with the last thing. If you take anything away from this conversation, please let it be that this is a process and you do not have to do a million things at a time. You don't have to change everything. A lot of us have been teaching for several years. We have been cultivating our materials and our course handouts and assignments and PowerPoints and all of these things over the last couple of years, or many years in some of our cases, that this is not necessarily something that changes all at once. So I really want you to take this to heart. You can change one little thing at a time, and that's okay. And that is enough. As I said, your students can tell. Your students can tell the difference with whether or not you really are committed to changing the equity in our institutions, or if you're trying just to do it because we think that's what we're supposed to do, which unfortunately does happen. I think it's probably less likely in this audience, but unfortunately there are professors out there that do that, where they're like, okay, my department is telling me to do this, my chair is telling me that we really need to increase diversity, and so they change a couple of pronouns or names in their slides, and that's it. That's a Band-Aid. So if you really are committed, your students will notice. They will understand and respect your effort. So every step that you take towards equity is meaningful and important. Everything. But take it one step at a time. So again, because it was so important, I put it in here twice. Make those small, tiny little steps. So for example, the first semester that I ever decided to really look into this and really decide that I need to be part of the solution and making a more equitable institution, making higher education more equitable as I get onto the job market. All I did that first semester was diversify my stock images. I have a lot of stock images that I use in my slide decks, for my PowerPoints, in class. I'm a very visual person, so I'd like to add visuals to my slides. to make them interesting and fun and interactive. And that was the first thing I did. I literally just changed out all of the pictures. It's getting better, and maybe it's because of my Google history, but now when I used to Google college students, stock images, everything that showed up was traditionally white students. There wasn't a lot of students of color. There weren't a lot of LGBTQIA plus community members. It was pretty bland. And so what I had to actively do was search terms like LGBTQIA plus students, college students, students of color, and be able to pull all of these different aspects of diversity into my slides. And so this also includes things like disability status or any of the other ones. There's a lot of different things that talk about diversity that aren't just about ethnicity and race. So that was the first thing. That was it. That was the only thing I did my first semester. The second semester, I went through all of my materials over the holiday break and decided I'm going to go ahead and diversify a lot of my examples. And so what I did was I diversified the names. All I did was I had all of these very white sounding names or very cisgender, heteronormative couples, if I had parents in my examples, things like that. And so what I did was I just started using the names of my friends and the people I know, because the people I know are very diverse. And I have a lot of different people in my life that are from all sorts of different walks of life. And so I used their names. I told them that I was using their names, and that really helped to diversify my examples so that they were more representative of what the people were that I'm actually teaching. So I did this with names and pronouns. If I had like a couple or partners, I made sure that I just changed a little bit about it. And I said partners, or I used they, them in a couple of my examples just to throw it in there. And I didn't draw attention to any of this. I just made it part of the norm. So now my slides had some diversified stock images. My examples had some more diversity in all sorts of walks of life in order to have materials that actually reflected the students that I was teaching. So here's where we kind of get into the strategies and the tips. I have a ton of these. This is what I came up with in these last couple weeks. But I had to stop myself from really going deeper into this. Again, these are what I use. So you don't necessarily have to do any of these if you don't like them. You can pick and choose which ones you want to do. You can do one at a time. Just make it easy for yourself. Don't overwhelm yourself, because we're all already overworked, right? We all already have so many different things that we have to juggle as educators. And right now I'm writing a paper. I'm working on my dissertation. I just finished collecting data for my qualitative piece of my mixed method dissertation. I have students and clients that I see because I'm a consultant for statistics at my school in my department. I have all these different things that I'm juggling. And then somehow we also have to do service, and we have to do like teaching. I'm not teaching this semester, but it's something that I have done every semester since I started. And so I understand the workload. So don't try and take on too much, because if you do, you probably won't stick it out. That's why I made these little tiny changes one at a time. So number one is I'm honest and upfront. I tell my students that I don't subscribe to this whole gotcha mentality that they're used to. And I usually have a pretty open conversation with them at the beginning of the semester. I do a pretty extensive introduction to myself, my practices, my pedagogy, so they understand what kind of teacher I am and how I'm going to be there for them. I tell them straight away, I don't do gotcha. If I didn't teach it to you in the class, I'm not going to put it on the exam, period. So if you didn't actually practice it on something that I've given you as a handout and we practice it in class, you're not going to be tested on it. And if that means that I don't get to something, I take it off the test. I don't expect them to do extra things outside of the classroom, because learning's hard enough. And I teach statistics a lot of the times, or research methods, and statistics is hard enough without saying, oops, I didn't get to this, I ran out of time, go read that chapter on your own, and then I'm going to test you on it. I don't think it's fair. So I don't do that, and I tell them that. I'm never trying to trick them. I'm going to tell them exactly how to get an A in my class. So that leads into this. I tell my students that I genuinely want to see them succeed, because I do. I really care about my students, and I understand that a lot of this may be that I'm still new to teaching. I've only been teaching for 5 years, but I've taught other aspects of life before this. I used to teach writing lessons, horseback riding lessons, before I decided to go back to school. So there were a lot of things that I've had a lot of educational opportunities in my life. And so I understand that this might be, oh, wait till you've been doing this for 10 years and see if you're still so optimistic. But so far, so good. And I'm hoping to hold on to this. So with this, I tell them I genuinely want them to succeed, and I mean it. I give them very clear rubrics. I tell them exactly how to get an A. I tell them exactly what's going to be on the test. I have study sessions before my exams, and I literally go through the exam with them and give them examples. I don't give them the same questions, obviously, but I say, hey, make sure that you look at that worksheet that we did, because that entire page is going to be on your exam. I also give examples of assignments. So I'll take the A papers that I've had in previous classes, and I'll de-identify them and put them up there for them to look at and say, this is an A paper. This person got 100%, so you can do it too. This is one that is pretty unique to me, in that no matter what class I'm teaching, I cover mental health. And the reason I do this is because, one, I found that most of my students are never spoken to with a discussion-based conversation about mental health and well-being in college. When I start this day, I always ask them, how many of you have actually been talking about this in any of your classes? And the number is really slim. I'll usually get 1 or 2 people that say, hey, we talked about it in one class, or I talked about it in high school once, and that's it. Our students have access to so many resources, and they don't know it, and they don't know what they can do or how to get to those resources. So I started doing this. I've taught 3 different classes in my time at my university, and I started doing this with my first one, and then I did it all the way through every statistics class I ever taught, and then I also did it with my research methods class that I just taught last semester for the first time. And the feedback I get from my students is that this is their favorite class. They love that I do this. They're very thankful. I get really nice emails and messages on Canvas from students every single semester. And without fail, they tell me it's because they've never been told about any of this. They didn't understand a lot of this. And so I have this PowerPoint available. It is very much geared towards my institution, but it can work as a template for your own. So it's open source. I can provide it to you if you'd like it. It really just goes through what definitions and how to see what poor mental health looks like in your friends and yourselves. And it's something that my students have consistently told me has been a really important class for them. And if we're looking at things like inclusivity, this includes everybody. So different types of mental health are really important to take a look at in college, specifically because suicide is a really high percentage. Like for college students, it's a really high percent. It's like 1 in 3 college students deal with a significant mental health crisis in their time in college, and so they don't know what resources they have. And so this is chock full of resources for everything, so that they have it all in one place. I tell them to download it, keep it, send it to their friends, so they've got it. Also, I'm very open with my students. Um, every semester, I start off my class with this fairly extensive introduction to myself because I think it's really important, at least it was for me when I was going through my undergraduate career. I found it the most important and the best classes were when my professors showed me that they were real people and that they struggle too. So I'm really open with my students. I share my own struggles, specifically around my education, so that they can come to me and they feel comfortable coming to me with theirs. I tell them I'm in my office because I am. Most days I was in my office. I'm actually working remotely this semester, but up until this semester, I was in my office every day. And so I told them, if you see the light on, knock and I'm probably there. You can always come in. And I haven't had anyone abuse that over the 5 years and thousands of students that I've taught. I can understand that it can happen, but I've never had anyone do it yet. With this, I ask my students every single day, how are you doing? How are classes? How are you feeling? What's going on with you right now? And check in with them and do a real temperature check before I start my class every single class period. With this, going back to kind of sharing my own journey, I talk about my educational journey because it is not a straight linear line. I have been all over the place. I spent a lot of time at my junior college, kind of wandering around trying to figure out what I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing. I was a history major. I was an art major, an art history major for a little bit. And then I realized that whenever I had a fun class or a gap in my schedule that I could fill with something, it was always a psychology class. So in that time, I wandered around and I earned 3 associate's degrees. And then I talk about how I left school for 10 years and I worked in industry. I was working in retail management. I worked at a bookstore for a long time and I loved it until one day I didn't. And then I went back to school 10 years outside of the classroom, finished my bachelor's, graduated magna cum laude, and then I was able to go through my master's in a year and a half. I earned a certificate in mixed methodology, and all of this, I didn't go back to school until I was in my 30s. And so I tell them this so that they understand that education's not linear and their path can kind of be all over the place, and it's okay. It's part of the journey. So I try and make it so that they understand that they don't have to do everything in a specific order all the time. Here is a excerpt from one of those introductory slideshows that I have. And so this is about like, why the heck am I teaching stats? Why am I teaching this? So the slide that comes before this is the short answer, and it said, I sucked at math. That's it. My short answer was I was bad at math and I didn't like it at all. I tried to avoid it and I couldn't. So the long answer is that I had really amazing professors who encouraged me, but it took a long time. And so this is something I like to go through because like I said, it resonated so strongly with me when I was an undergrad and I had my professors tell their own stories, and it made it so that they were very real and very honest, and it made it feel like, okay, if you struggled and you're still successful, then I can struggle and be successful. So here's the fun slide that I have here. So in high school, I had to take algebra. I failed it. I had to take it in summer school. Then I took geometry, didn't learn my lesson, and I failed it again and had to take summer school a second year. In junior college, this is the class I needed in order to get into, that was the one that can transfer to universities. So nothing else before that transferred over to a university. This was the class you needed. I had to take all of these remedial classes in order to get into Math 1A so that I could actually transfer it to university. So I took 4 different classes trying to get all of my stuff together and get to be able to take the most elementary math class in order to pass to a university. And this was part of the reason why I took so much time away from school. I was just exhausted because this took a long time. In undergrad, I took 4 statistics and methods courses. What I tell people is that this class is the very first time that I had a professor that believed in me. First time. Only math class I ever got an A in, and it's because she told me I could. And I was in her office pretty much every day, or at least several times a week, really talking to her about, can you slow it down? Can you just tell me again how to do this? And she would never make me feel stupid for not understanding the concepts. Really talking about how we can come together, and I am capable of learning it. So what she would do is let me come to her office and she'd re-explain things. She'd give me new examples that she didn't give in class, and I never felt stupid. In many previous classes, I always felt behind. So that was something that I like to emphasize. And one of the major reasons that I also study the impact of faculty support, because we matter, we do. And I can give you all sorts of statistics on that. Come hang out and I can give it, like, we can do coffee and I can talk your ear off about it. So 4 statistics class and methods courses in undergrad. This last class was an advanced, like a beginning intro to advanced statistics. And it was the first time that I really felt like I actually could get it. And I really linked up with stats, and I love it now, and I teach it. So in grad school, I've taken all those classes. I've taken a lot of stats and methods courses. And so this is really to illustrate, okay, I really was bad at math, like really bad. In that Psych 101 class, I literally cried in the bathroom every single class period. I had a partner that I worked with through all of these stats and methods courses. So Psych 101, 121, and 102 were all connected. It was a series. And I had one partner that I used. We partnered up on all of our projects for the entire time. And so he didn't know that that's what I did. He said, like, I saw you going to the bathroom, but I didn't know that that's what you were doing. I would cry, get over it, and come back and try again. So I like to be real with my students, and I like to tell them why I believe in them, because I was so bad and I got through, and now I feel successful at stats. So now, also looking at a couple of these other strategies, I teach using a flipped classroom. And what that means is that a lot of students I found don't have people that they can go to at home. And so this is looking at, I'm a first generation college student. I'm also a returning student. I'm a transfer student. I started out at junior college. I am on the lower end of the SES. We were very working class, and we have not been able to do a lot with that. So I like to make sure that people know it. With this, I do all of their homework with them in class. I meet my students where they are. Students come to me with really low self-efficacy, and I try and help them get better at it because that was something of my journey. I try to diversify my materials whenever I can. I try really hard not to assign textbooks because they're expensive, or I get the older versions on PDF and I give it to them. I make sure that I include BIPOC authors, and I also provide context for statistics. I teach a whole history lesson on statistics and how it came to be through the eugenics movement and things tied to World War II and the Holocaust and things like that, because I think it's important that they understand where these people were coming from and why statistics came about. I also try and share the good, amazing contributions of people that don't usually get recognized, so especially BIPOC scientists. In this, I always have a variety of ways my students can learn. So I do things like little excerpts from textbooks, but I also assign TED Talks, pop culture articles, podcasts, things like that, so that they have all these different ways to connect with the material. And I don't tell them that they have to read everything. I tell them, sample a little bit, do some of the ones that speak to you, and then kind of they get all of the material somehow through doing all of those things. With this is a quote from a student. I'm going to skip through a couple of these just for sake of time, because we did start a little bit late, and I understand that your time is very important, and I want to make sure that you all get to do what you need to do today. One of the biggest things that I do is I try and break the cycle of gatekeeping in STEM. When I teach intro stats, I try and remove a lot of the jargon, because the jargon isn't necessary. And just because it makes you sound smart does not mean that anyone understands what you're saying when you're talking about all of these, multi-level modeling type things, and you're going into all of the specifics. You can break it down and teach them that jargon, but then teach them what it means. And that's what I do. I talk about normal people language all the time. So whenever I can, I also try and make it fun. My PowerPoints are entertaining. I give my students M&Ms to teach them probability. I teach one tail versus two tails with cats. I also talk about degrees of freedom, because that's what the actual definition is, but we don't, I don't know what that means. And so I teach it with shoes. It's something that I did this with some grad students. They're like, this is the first time I've ever understood how you get degrees of freedom and what it means. This is something that I really wanted to emphasize. So I brought in a couple of these quotes because I think it's really important to hear what our students are saying. And this is something that I got doing my qualitative interviews with students for my dissertation. And this just, it made me so sad. So the loss of interest in learning is a really big thing for college students. And so that's what I'm trying to come up against, because people are coming from all these different places in life. And I want to make sure that they're heard and that they can still learn. So as I've kind of alluded to, this is the hardest step, but it is the most important piece of advice that I have. Ask your students, talk to them. This is something that I do all the time, and I get that it's super scary, and educators in general have a lot of ego, and so we don't like to ask vulnerable questions, but we do that. So this is something that I really want to talk about, in that asking your students, because they are the experts. Again, I can provide this so that people can see all of these. This is something that I asked students to respond to, in what is negatively impacting their well-being in college. And a lot of these had to do with their relationships with faculty and not feeling like they were good enough, and really having low self-efficacy for their own abilities. And so we can do something about that. With this, I do a lot of anonymous soliciting of opinions from them. So I do things like anonymous surveys. Most of the stuff that they turn into me is online, so I don't know their handwriting. And so I ask them to put it on a piece of paper and do something called a stop, start, and continue. It's something that I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and I've changed my courses because of the feedback I've gotten. And so I do these every semester. And then I have a lot of tools here available for you. As I said, I can provide all of these for you. This is something that I use a lot. So the Padlet that we were talking about, and I use Zoom Whiteboard. That's what I used for all of the sticky note looking ones. I use that for my dissertation. I also use Poll Everywhere. It's a great way to make word clouds and have students brainstorm. Kahoot is fun. I don't use it very often, but it's fun to get, if they're really struggling with energy, I tend to do something like this, because then I do a fun little competition and it gets them energized again. So that's all I have today. I know that we're a little low on time, so I wanted to make sure to kind of rush through those last couple of slides. But if you have any questions, please let me know. As I said, everything I do is open source. We're going to skip this part because we don't have time for it. But everything I do is open source. And everything I have in here, all of these different materials and examples, I can give you no problem. So everything is available if you email me or you contact Melissa, one of us can get you all of the information. And so here's my statement about open science. And then here's my contact information. There's my email, kwick2@huskers.unl.edu. And then my website is kelleymwick.com. I'm also going to put all of these materials on my website so that they're easily attained. I just didn't get to that before then. So thank you so much for being here. And I would love to hear any questions or feedback or what you're doing, because we can all learn from each other.
Thank you so much for this lovely presentation. And clearly, you care a lot about your students, and that came through with all of the care and concern you give to crafting your classes and making sure that they have a very welcoming, inclusive learning environment. So kudos to you for that. We had a question come through pretty early, so I'm going to ask that one, and then I will see if there's other questions that have popped into the chat. But one of our attendees asked for your thoughts on AI as a tool for inclusivity, and if you have any thoughts around that.
I do. I have a lot of thoughts about AI. I was just discussing this with a friend of mine, and she called me a boomer because I said that I'm kind of anti-AI at this point. And the reason for that, I see the value. I do. But I don't think we know enough about it to be able to utilize it to its best ability at this point in time. I don't think there's been enough testing or enough understanding of the product and what it can do for it to be as widely available as it is right now. That doesn't mean I don't think that it's great. I think that it's really helpful. I just worry about, I study cognition, I study, learning and how we learn. And I don't want it to replace original thought. And so that was the comment that I got the okay boomer too. So I just wanted to emphasize that, but it is something that I think is really interesting. And if you're looking at generating ideas, I think it's great for that. Generating entire papers, not great. Also because it's not very refined at this moment. It makes up citations, it makes up figures, it makes up stats, and you can't double check them because those citations don't exist. And so my department has actually just banned it until we learn more. And so we're just going to wait for more research to be done on it. And I agree with that stance.
So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that, Kelly. I don't see any other questions coming through, and it is 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.